Hello, I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. With us, John Williams, economist John Williams at the renowned Shadowstats.com. John Williams, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Greg.
Well, let's start off with the big number that you extrapolated out of Treasury data, and that the real GAAP accounting, that's the generally accepted accounting principles, the same accounting any big company would use, our real deficit, counting everything, $6.9 trillion for 2012, fiscal 2012. What does that tell you about what's going on in the economy?
Well, it's generally not when things come in worse than people expect, and this, I believe, was worse than people expected. Generally, that's because the economy is not as strong as people are looking at or assuming. When you look at projections for the budget going forward, and you're going to have a lot of projections in the next couple of months as Congress supposedly works to balance the deficit over 10 years. All those projections over 10 years are going to be based on assumptions of underlying economic activity. And they're going to be assuming 3-4% growth in the economy, which would tend to generate certain levels of revenues and such. But if, however, you do not have an economic recovery, and I'll contend we've never had one, that the economy basically has been bottom bouncing and it's beginning to turn down again. If you have ongoing recession or stagnant economic conditions, that means the budget deficit is going to be a lot worse than they're projecting, and any efforts that they make at balancing could be well offset by a worse than expected economy.
So that economy equals declining tax receipts, tax confiscation, they call it revenues. So you're saying that that the job picture is looking worse. What are the things that are telling you it's looking worse? I mean, they said retail sales were up a little bit, but not that much. They say housing's doing much better. Prices are up. Housing starts are up, and factory production, though, according to you, is taking a nosedive. Is housing really? Let's start with housing. Is housing really doing all that well?
Well, it's doing better than it had been doing, but it's still down nearly 70% from where it was in 2006. The latest home sales numbers show a pickup again in foreclosure activity, accounting for some portion of sales. Actually, sales are dropping. The building has been up, but it's been very volatile. The month-to-month change in that rarely is statistically significant. I mean, you can be up 10%, for example, but that would be with a confidence interval around it of plus or minus 20%. So you could be down 10%, you could be up 30%. The monthly numbers are not too meaningful. You look at retail sales. There you've been moving a little bit above zero. We've had a couple of months of dropping gasoline prices, which has had the effect of actually turning inflation negative, which boosts retail sales after inflation adjustment. But that's about to end. And as it does, the inflation will be knocking off a growth from the retail sales. You had some effects in retail sales from the hurricane. That's about to pass. So we're going to see a much weaker retail sales outlook ahead. And there's a very simple reason for that, and that is that the consumer's in serious trouble. When you start getting poor quality statistics, and right now the monthly numbers that we're seeing, month-to-month change, just are not particularly significant. They're not really strong. They tend to be weakening. They're showing weakening patterns here. Well, you have to look at the underlying fundamentals. What's driving this? Is this credible? Should we be indeed seeing a recovery here? And the basic in the United States is a consumer. The consumer accounts for more than 70% of the gross domestic product. That's the total economy. If you have good income growth, you can have good growth in the economy, assuming that the growth in income is faster than inflation. the way that the gross domestic product, the GDP, is measured, is net of inflation. Because if you have rapidly rising prices, something that's not deflated for inflation would be rising due to higher prices as opposed to basic economic activity. And what you'll see is that the average guy's not making it. His income is not keeping up with inflation. Household income, median household income, it's the lowest level of the cycle. I mean, it's a volatile series, but it's lower than it was during the official recession. It is you take average weekly earnings. Generally, they've been in decline. They're below where they were in the 1970s. Problem here is that if you don't have sustainable growth in income, you can't have sustainable growth in consumption. You can buy a little bit of growth from the future through debt expansion, but the consumer doesn't have the ability to expand his borrowing the way he did before this crisis hit, either in terms of putting an extra loan on his house or in terms of building up his credit card debt. Consumer credit outstanding, it gets a lot of press that it's booming. Although the official number has been growing, but all of the growth has been in student loans made by the federal government. You're not seeing it in aggregate with the types of loans that consumers use to go out and buy goods and services. And that's without the income and without the credit growth, there's no way the consumer can fuel ongoing growth. And this portion of the economy is more than 2/3 of the economy is impaired here. We haven't had a recovery. We're not about to have one, and it's getting worse. The consumer's liquidity is getting worse, and along with that, the economy will weaken again.
And you're saying if you really want to keep up with just the cost of living, you really need a 7% or so, 8% return, 9% return. You need a 7 to 9% raise just to keep up with the real cost of living. Is that right?
That's right. If you use a government's number, you're going to be constantly behind what's happening, and most people see that. I mean, the Social Security recipients most commonly complain, I can't make ends meet on the adjustment they've just given me. Well, what the government did in the CPI was to try and reduce the CPI specifically for things such as cost of living adjustments. That was a way of reducing the budget deficit, cutting those costs of Social Security without anyone in Congress having to vote against Social Security.
Yeah.
Same thing again. They raised the issue at the end of the year when they were going through the cliff negotiations, and it died down because of some protests. You've got another situation coming up in the next month or two where they're going to be trying to work a deal, and this is something they'd agreed on before. They're going to try and change the CPI again and make it even lower.
Well, let me ask you this about this latest fiscal cliff deal. They told us a couple of years ago, oh, we'll take care of this January 1st, 2013. They didn't. We got a tax increase. Then they pushed it back to another couple of months, and now another couple of months. Now they just changed it again, and they pushed it back into May. And so aren't the Republicans really kind of saying, okay, we'll give you what you want? Aren't the Republicans saying, hey, listen, this is going to crash and burn? Everybody knows how bad the economy is. It can't just be you and me and the people on USA Watchdog. Congress has to know. The Democrats, Republicans, the president, John Boehner, they all know how bad it is. Aren't they just playing the game of musical chairs and waiting for this thing to blow up and not take the blame? Aren't the Republicans just saying, okay, we'll give you your debt ceiling increase, and then meanwhile, what happens if the economy falls out of bed? We get a ratings downgrade. To your point, we have all these dollars sold abroad, all these, 12 trillion U.S. liquid dollar assets. I mean, is that what the Republicans are doing? Are they really trying to cut a deal, or are they just turning it back over to the Democrats?
Well, you certainly have a high level of politics being played here, but both sides are faced with devil's choices. And here's the problem. It's very difficult to stimulate the economy by trying to balance a budget, because that generally entails cutting spending, which is bad for the economy, or raising taxes, which is bad for the economy. They've already raised the taxes. That's one reason that the economy is turning down again, although it started turning down in advance of that.
So what, basically you're saying we put it on steroids. We raised taxes and we really got it going down. It was going down and then we turned it farther.
Okay, so what the politicians want to do is keep the spending at least as it is, even increase it if possible. At least that's what you get from the Democrat side. But and that's with an eye towards helping to stimulate the economy. I can understand that desire. The other side, the big problem here is the global financial markets and how they view the U.S. dollar. We've been through a crisis here. You almost had a collapse of the system back in 2008, and the rest of the world is now looking for the U.S. to put its fiscal house in order. That means tightening the belt. It means indeed some downside pressure on the economy. But we've been living beyond our means for decades. There's no way you can bring the system into balance without having some adjustment, some change in the way that the system operates.
But there's no way to do it unless we have another recession or a depression or who knows what.
The recession we had. But the problem is, as this reflects with the dollar, is as the dollar declines, and I think we're going to see very heavy selling pressure against the dollar, that in turn will push inflation a lot higher. It'll spike gasoline prices, for example. And as inflation runs higher, that creates an even worse problem than what we're seeing with the economy. It's not a happy circumstance. There's no happy solution, but you have no chance of moving towards a resolution and a sense of stability here until the deficit is brought into balance.
Let me come back back to the $6.9 trillion real deficit in fiscal 12. Does that scare you?
Yes, it does.
Why?
Well, it's not containable. It's not sustainable. It means we're bankrupt. And if we're bankrupt, well, let me put it this way. Nations usually don't go bankrupt. What they do, if they have the ability to make the money, to print the money, in which the debt is denominated, they do so. And that's a traditional solution. That's where we're heading. The Fed is already talking of doing that with their quantitative easing 3. Anything that they would do in terms of buying treasuries is effectively monetizing the debt, creating money. And that creates inflation. So the dollar, you put a lot of dollars out there, you can't raise enough in taxes. And I mean, it was close to $7 trillion in deficit. You can't raise enough in taxes. You can't cut enough in spending, except in the social programs as well. I mean, you could cut all your defense spending on down the line, but unless you also touch the social programs, you're still in deficit. To bring things into balance, all those things have to work, and it's I see no way they can do it. So you're going to end up with a very bad inflation problem down the road. I'm still looking at a hyperinflation by the end of 2014.
Last final question. So let's just say, the new sheriff comes into town and they stop the $40 billion a month in buying mortgage-backed securities, banker fraud, and they stop the $45 billion a month in propping up the government and buying treasuries. What would happen if they just stopped that? Just boom. We're going to stop. The economy's in recovery. Let's just stop that. What would happen to the United States?
Well, it would very rapidly spike interest rates. If the U.S. couldn't had problems with its borrowing, which it would. That's the reason the Fed's there, is to help keeping the Treasury liquid in the markets. Again, you're going to see heavy selling of the dollar. The Fed has to be able to operate to keep the system functioning, but without what the Fed's doing, you'd very rapidly see a rise in interest rates. You're still going to see a rapid rise in interest rates as the inflation starts to kick in, but a little further down the road. and that in turn is very bad for the economy and the financial markets.
And when does the world say, whoo, $6.9 trillion deficit for 1 year? We're done. We're selling. We're selling treasuries. We're selling stocks. We're out. When does that happen? When is the world going to call BS on the BS?
It's the type of thing that could happen at any time. I can't give you a specific timing on it, but the risk is there now. And I think the markets will give the Congress a little bit of time to work things, but they're not going to give them 3 or 4 months. I don't think it'll go that long without there being some major negative reaction in the global markets.
You think there's going to be a negative reaction in the next 3 or 4 months to the dollar? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely.
You mean a dollar sell-off in the next 3 or 4 months?
That would be my guess. No guarantees, but it's not the type of thing that people are going to keep waiting for. What they're talking about doing in the next 3-4 months is what, in theory, they were going to be doing the end of 2012, or what they were doing in theory back in the middle of 2011.
So this is the end of the road coming up in May. Either they fix it or they don't.
They're not going to have another opportunity behind this. They're pushing the limit as it is now.
John Williams, ShadowStats.com, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
My pleasure.